So now we're gonna measure the dynamic range, which is really we're measuring to see if there's any clipping happening. Essentially, white is 235. That is what the specification of white is. But there's something called headroom, which there is possibility to be some content that has white and some detailed information in white slightly above the actual standard for white. So we don't want a hard clip at 235 if we don't have to. So I will take a read series and we'll see what this display is doing.
So you mentioned that there's some content above this 235 white point. I mean, is this information significant, or why is dynamic range so significant on setting up a display?
There's some content, a lot of people have verified this using scopes and feeding or even analyzing Blu-ray discs and stuff that has information above white, especially stuff that has a lot of dynamic range, like a skiing documentary that has a lot of shades of white. A lot of the times they go over just so they can get more dynamic range in the picture. And also, if you're hard clipping at 235, you can lose detail near white, and you definitely don't want to be clipping before 235. So our results right here is exactly what we want to see. There's no plateau. If we did hard clip at white, you would see all the lines go straight over. I might even be able to turn up the contrast in this display to show us what clipping would look like. So I'm going to rerun this with the contrast turned up too high. So that's what clipping starts to look like. So if you're seeing that, that means your contrast is too high, and you should step it down until you don't get any of that plateauing effect. So I'm going to go and bring my contrast back down to where we weren't getting any clipping and rerun this.
I noticed that in some of the plotted data, it looks like there's some separation from the blue. It's much higher than the green and the red reading. Can you just explain it? Is that something that we should be concerned about, or is that something that's acceptable for doing this test?
Yeah, so essentially, if this display was theoretically perfectly calibrated, the red, green, and blue lines would all be right on top of each other. Right here, this tells us that there's too much blue in the white point. So on the next page, when we do the 2-point white balance adjustment, that's what will be removed, is bringing the blue down, and then it'll be more right on top of the green and red. But if you see that, don't worry, that's going to be fixed in a further step. You just want to make sure there's no plateauing happening. And this little plateau at the very end, that's right at like 254. That's nothing to worry about. You just don't want to see a plateau like right here.
Okay, well that makes a lot of sense, especially seeing that when we were doing the color temperature test, it was measuring slightly cooler than the white point we wanted. It was like over 7,000. So that makes a lot of sense. All right, well let's go ahead and move on to the next step and go from there in optimizing this display.